All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Criminal Justice and Self-Advocacy webinar. My name is Jaleesa, and I am a part of the Arts Events team. I will be providing support for this webinar today. So first, I'm going to break down how to use the features on the desktop application, and then I will move on to discuss how to join using your mobile app. You may have joined using an alternate method, but we do recommend joining using the desktop application for the best attendee experience. So if you're not familiar with Zoom, I would like to take this time to point out where you can find your meeting controls. There are a few features that we will be using today. So we're using Connect to Audio so you can hear us. We're using the chat feature. This webinar is also closed caption, so we have the option to turn closed caption on and off. And you also have the option to leave the webinar before it ends by clicking on the Leave Meeting button. So you can connect to the audio by joining using your computer or by dialing using your phone. I'm sure most of you are already connected. However, if you notice that you're having trouble hearing the presenters, I recommend switching to phone audio. But if you choose to connect using your computer, you can test your speaker. It will play a ringtone and ask if you heard it. From there, you can continue to adjust your audio settings. No need to test your mic because all attendees are muted during this webinar. Now, as I mentioned, all attendees are muted because this webinar is in a listen-only mode. Only the panelists can speak. Your video has also been turned off. And as you can see, this webinar is interpreted in American Sign Language. Now, throughout the webinar, you should be able to see the presentation, the presenters, and ASL interpreters at the same time. If that's not what you're seeing on your end, you will need to change your video layout to gallery view. You will find the different layouts above the speaker's video or in the upper right section of your screen. If you need assistance changing your layout, please let me know in the chat. Also, occasionally, we may need to pause to switch out the interpreters. So please bear with us when we do so. Now, as I mentioned, this webinar will be closed caption. If you're using the desktop application, here's how to enable closed captions. Go to Meeting Controls, which is at the bottom of the screen, and click on Closed Captions. Select Show Subtitle, and you should be able to see the captions right above the meeting controls. If your captions are too small or too large, you can resize them by clicking on Closed Caption and selecting Subtitle Settings. Now we're moving on to the chat feature. When you click on Chat, the chat window will appear. It will be on the right if you are not in full screen. If you are in full screen, it will appear in a window that you can move around your screen. We ask that you only use chat if you're having technical difficulties during the webinar and need assistance, and if the presenters ask a question and would like for you to respond. Now, when we get to the question and answer portion of the webinar, we ask that you do not use the chat feature for questions. Please submit questions using the Q&A feature, which is located on the meeting control. If you would like to submit a question anonymously, you have the option to do so. Just click on the Send Anonymously checkbox. Your questions will be answered via text, or one of the presenters will respond out loud for everyone to hear. Using this feature to ask questions help the presenters to keep organized, so we ask that you please do so. All right, so now we are moving on to how to join using your mobile application. So if you join using your mobile device, here's a few tips. First, if you join using your phone, the meeting controls can be found at the bottom of the screen, as it's shown in the picture. And if you join using your iPad, the controls can be found at the top of your screen, which is the first picture. Now we're going to talk about the video layout on your phone. Please note that gallery view, which is the view that allows you to see multiple participants, is not supported on the web browser, but it is supported on your mobile device. On your phone, you will only be able to see 3 panelists plus the interpreter on the screen at the same time on your phone. Please note that you cannot see multiple presenters and look at the presentation at the same time. If you would like to see the videos of all the presenters, swipe left to switch to the gallery view. And if you would like to move back to the actor speaker view, which is where you can only see one person, swipe right until you get there. And now we're going to talk about the video layout if you're using your iPad. So when using your iPad, you should be able to see up to 9 participants plus the presentation. If you would like to change to gallery view on your iPad, you should click on the plus sign, which is located at the upper right corner of the panelist video, which is circled. It's the first picture that's circled. And once you click on that, you should be able to see all the participants, all the video participants, as well as the presentation. Now, for those that join using your mobile device, here's how to enable closed captions. Open the app on your phone or iPad. Click on the settings button located at the top left corner of the screen. Select meetings, and then there you can toggle on and off closed captioning. You can also turn on closed caption while you're in the webinar if you forgot to do so before you join. Go to the More button, which is located on the meeting controls. That is at the top left corner of the screen if you're using an iPad, and located at the bottom right corner of the screen if you're using a phone. Select meeting settings, and then there you should be able to toggle on and off closed captioning. You can also view the full transcript, however, it will block the presentation. Unfortunately, there is currently no way to increase the size of the closed captions on a phone or an iPad. Now, the chat and Q&A feature will be located on the More button. For the iPad, the More button is located on the upper right corner of the screen. For the phone, the More button is located at the bottom right corner of the screen. Again, if you're having any technical difficulties, please message me, the host, in the chat, and I will try my absolute best to assist you. That's all for my portion of the webinar. Now I will turn it over to Reginald Thomas.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reginald Thomas. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am the Senior Program Associate of National Initiative with the ARC of the United States. Now, I am be function as a moderator for today's webinar, and I'm joined by my co-moderator. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ariel Sims. My pronouns are she, hers, or they, them. I'm the Senior Program Manager and Attorney for Access, Equity, and Inclusion at the ARC of the United States. And I'm really excited to be here with all of you, with my co-moderator, Reginald, and with all of our incredible panelists today. Now, before we get to the content of today's webinar, there is some initial messaging that we want to make sure that we pause and take some time. But I'm going to pause right now. It looks like folks can't see the American Sign Language interpreter, so I just want to pause and make sure we're good to go. Okay, I believe they're now spotlighted. If you still cannot see the American Sign Language interpreter, please post in the chat box and you can direct that to our host. And we'll make sure that we pause and you can see everybody. Okay. So we're here with the ARC. Obviously, we're a disability civil rights organization, but we need to also acknowledge that people with disabilities do not have a single identity. People have all kinds of identities that they bring to the table, and when we're talking about the criminal justice system, we know that identities really, really matter and are incredibly important. So we wanted to kind of highlight this and the fact that intersectionality of these identities, or how identities overlap, is so important. So on your screen, there are a few different images of various diverse individuals with different types of intellectual and developmental disabilities. And there's also a couple of graphics that can help demonstrate why intersectionality of these different identities matters so much. So I want to start with the graphic on the bottom left, which is about those who experience domestic abuse. You can see by different colored bars here that if we look at, say, just queer women who experience domestic abuse, it's a very significant number. 25% of queer women have experienced domestic abuse. If we add on the identity of disability, so now we're looking at queer women with disabilities, that number jumps to 39%. On the other side of the system, we can look at something like arrest rates to get a good sense of why intersectionality matters so much when we have these conversations. So one study in 2017 showed that for white men, men of color who would be arrested by age 28, that number was 40%, so they had a 40% chance of being arrested. And if we compare that with men of color with disabilities, that jumps to 55%. So more than half of men of color with disabilities will be arrested by age 28. So here at the National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability, we take this very seriously, and we want to make sure that everyone in the justice system knows how important this is. We, of course, also want to acknowledge everything that's happening in our country right now. I know many of you are just frankly tired, exhausted, hurting, in pain, and we are too. We really are. And we want to acknowledge and address that the injustice right now being faced by both the African American and Black communities is incredibly significant. We want to acknowledge that our country has a long history with racism and racial bias, including our criminal justice system. So please know that we stand with you, we will fight with all of you, and we'll work tirelessly with you to make sure we address these injustices moving forward. We always invite your input, suggestions, comments, questions. You can email us anytime at nccjdinfo@thearc.org. And I'd like to just say thank you to all of you who are joining us today, taking time away from maybe other activities or activism, and we really hope you enjoy the webinar that we have for you. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Reginald.
Sorry. Thank you, Ariel. So welcome to everyone for our third and final webinar, Criminal Justice and Self-Advocacy. This is our third webinar in our Know Your Rights series. Next slide, please. We're on webinar 3, webinar 1, being Criminal Justice System 101. Webinar 2, being Know Your Rights as a Person with a Disability in the Criminal Justice System. Those 2 recordings will be available soon on thearc.org. And for our final webinar, which is today, is Criminal Justice and Self-Advocacy. For anyone who is joining us late for our webinar, please, here are just a few reminders. Please know that all attendees are muted. You can turn on closed captions. The ASL interpreter will be spotlighted, and we will have short breaks while we change interpreters. If you're experiencing any technical problems during this webinar, please visit support.zoom.us or type in the chat box, and we'll be able to help you. For today's webinar, it will be recorded and archived along with a PowerPoint and transcript, and that will be on thearc.org. If you have any questions regarding any technical assistance or about the webinar itself, please email events@thearc.org. Now, I have a polling question for you all. I want to see how many of you have attended our first webinar and or our second webinar in this series. So just take a few moments to let us know, and then we can talk about the results.
For those of you on mobile devices, you might not be able to see the poll. So if you want to type in the chat box whether you were able to join us for earlier webinars in this series, please let us know there.
I am seeing a couple people in the chat have said that this is their first webinar that they're attending. Welcome. And this will be a really great webinar that you get to hear from perspectives from our self-advocates who we will introduce in just a few moments. Okay, so yeah, about 64% of our attendees today, this is their first webinar in the series. And we do have a few people who attended either one or both of our webinars, so welcome back again. So I'm glad that you all are able to join us. I know Ariel is happy, and our self-advocates are all happy to see you all. Well, not really see you, but have you here with us today. We want to thank the People with the Disabilities Foundation for making this webinar possible. For those who are unfamiliar with this foundation provides people with all types of disabilities with the education and advocacy to have access to equal opportunities in all aspects of life. Now, Ariel and I, for the Arc of the United States, we work in the criminal justice division called the National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability. Now, what we do in this division of the ARC is that we work at the intersection of disability rights and criminal justice reform. Now, I'm going to introduce our lovely presenters for today's webinar. I will say their name and then give them a chance to introduce themselves to you all. So we're going to start off with our first presenter, Nora Deal. So I'm going to make sure Noah is unmuted so he can introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Noah Deal, and I'm a self-advocate from California.
Thank you, Noah. Okay, next, Edward Plurd.
Okay, my name's Eddie Plurd. I'm a board member of the Oregon Council on Developmental Disabilities, and I'm a self-advocate of the Self-Advocacy Coalition in Oregon.
Thank you, Eddie. And last but not least, we have Tracy Wright.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Wright, and I'm from Maryland, and I'm a longtime member of People in the Go of Maryland, which is our statewide self-advocacy group.
Thank you, Tracy. So I'm glad to have you all here for our webinar discussion today, and I know that our attendees will be happy to hear from your perspective and just know a bit more about you all. Okay, so we have a few learning objectives for this webinar. After this webinar, you'll be able to understand how some self-advocates are working in the criminal justice space and also expanding your own self-advocacy skills in criminal justice contexts. So these self-advocates will help broaden your perspective and broaden your thinking and understanding on what it means to be a self-advocate in the criminal justice space. All right, so I have another question for you all, but this time, instead of a polling question, I want you all to enter it in our chat box. And this would be a lovely time to switch our ASL interpreters. So I'll wait before I ask the next question. Okay. Are we good? Are we good to go? Awesome. Well, I want you all just to tell me in your own words and what do you think, what does self-advocacy mean to you? And I see a few people have already started to input it in the chat box. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of good responses coming in pretty fast. I'll start reading a few of them. I see speaking up for yourself and speaking up for yourself and others, speaking the truth while also speaking up for yourself. I see sharing life experiences in hopes that it will make life better for all. These are all lovely responses. Okay. And here's one. Self-advocacy means understanding what an individual might need in order to be included in the community. You guys are doing really great. These are really good responses. Okay. Thank you all so much for your responses. Now we're going to just move forward in how we define self-advocacy. Now, how we define a self-advocate is a person with an intellectual or developmental disability who choose to advocate for themselves and for others with disabilities. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and start with our panelist discussion. So all of our self-advocates, can I ask you all unmute yourselves? Okay. All right. So I'll start things off by asking the first question. And Tracy, Noah, Eddie, just answer the question if you feel comfortable. The first question is, how do you become a self-advocate?
Maybe we'll start with Noah on that one.
Okay.
I became a self-advocate when I learned that I had a disability, and I learned that some of my rights were not being given to me.
Okay, so you started when you found out that your rights weren't given to you?
Yes.
Okay. Tracy, do you have anything to add about how you became a self-advocate as well?
I became a self-advocate after going through partners and policy making with the state ARC, which teaches people and parents with disabilities about the importance of advocating.
So working with the art kind of led you on the path of becoming a self-advocate?
Yes.
Great. Awesome. And Eddie, last
I
question.
went to a seminar, Art, My Voice, My Choice, that the self-advocacy group. It was in Roseburg area, and my care provider that lived in Coos Bay, and I lived in Coos Bay. We went to Roseburg one weekend, and I went to My Voice, My Choice and self-advocates as leaders. That that was a group in Oregon before the OSAC took over, and I learned how to be a self-advocate over there, and I did Partners in Policy Making. So I stuck with it, and I became the chair of self-advocates as leaders in that, and I was a very good chair in that, and I worked closely with everybody in the with self-advocates as leaders before OSAC was formed.
Okay. So were you kind of like wanting the beginning members and self-advocates in OSAC?
I'm a founding member of OSACs. One of the founding members of OSACs. So I'm a part of the Self-Advocacy Coalition. I'm a board member of the OSAC in Oregon. So I'm honored to be a founding member of OSAC.
All right. And being a part of OSAC has helped you become a really good advocate? Eddie?
Hold on.
No.
Looks like you're still muted, Eddie. Those darn mute buttons are so tricky.
Yes.
Okay. I am a self-advocate, and I will continue to be a self-advocate in Oregon because I'm passionate about self-advocacy, and I advocate for other people that do not have a voice in Oregon, and I want all people with disabilities to be involved in Oregon.
Great. Now I do want to ask you, Eddie, Tracy, and Noah, and we'll start with Noah for this one. Was there any specific events that really wanted you to start your self-advocacy?
So I was taken from my parents when I was young because of my disability, and they couldn't take care of me. I was put on the foster care system, and ever since then, I've kind of been fighting for a lot of people in the foster care system and other places that are disabled to speak up for themselves and, you know, tell how they want to be treated and get their rights back and stuff like that. So.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with us, Noah. All right. Tracy, was there anything you wanted to say about your path of being a self-advocate as well?
Well, like I mentioned before, when I went through Partners and Policy Making, leading came on, and she with a disability, and she spoke about how she's an advocate that goes around to all the states and talks about self-advocacy, but she spoke about how it was hard to speak up for herself in her own family as she got older, and that's how I learned about what I wanted to do for a job, and also that it's really important to get connected with a self-advocacy group.
Thank you, Tracy. And I know because of your work, you crossed paths with Ariel and I in the past when we've done our work. So your work has been very valuable and indispensable in this field.
Thank you.
Okay. And Eddie?
I went through Partners. I graduated in 2004, and that was really great for me I learned how to, I learned very, I was very good in the class and I did my homework and I did one-on-ones and I was very, very, very passionate about learning how to be a stronger self-advocate. And I became one with the involvement that I have been in Oregon. And I will continue to be a self-advocate and hold I will be I will be great to train new self-advocates and upcoming self-advocates that are transitioning to adulthood in Oregon.
I know Oregon is very lucky to have you as one of its leaders in the disability field, Eddie. And thank you for sharing your passion with us. Okay, so that's it for the first question. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ariel for our next one.
Well, thanks to all of our presenters who are sharing their experiences with how you became a self-advocate. And, you know, in the chat box, I was seeing that people were kind of calling out partners in policy making and kind of giving that a shout out. So that sounds like a really great option to get involved with self-advocacy. And some of your answers also made me think back to when we were asking what self-advocacy means to you, and we had words like fight and power and speaking up for oneself. And it sounds like you're all really using those skills all the time in the work you do. And that you're really kind of also gearing up to help the next generation of self-advocates do this work. So thank you for all of that. The question I really wanted to ask is, you know, of course, there are many people who maybe choose to be a self-advocate, but not everybody advocates in kind of the criminal justice space. So I wanted to ask each of you, why did you decide that you wanted to advocate in this space? And I know for some of you, you've had personal experience with the justice system. So I want to invite you to share some of that experience with us too. And I'm going to start with Noah, and then we'll go to Tracy and then Eddie. So Noah?
So I've had several experiences with the criminal justice system. Like I said, my earliest was being taken from my parents as a child. And I knew from that point on that I wanted to help kind of reform that system, so people with disabilities aren't being taken from their parents and put in foster care. Another situation was when I was older, I was profiled because I had disability, and they thought that I was stealing something and I wasn't. I was going to pay for it with my own money. And so I got arrested for that, and they said they would put me in jail, and I got out, thank God, because of my lawyer. But that's one of the main reasons why I advocate in the criminal justice system.
So Noah, someone actually accused you of stealing, it sounds like, because of your disability.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm so sorry that that happened to you.
I know.
And your advocacy around the foster care system too is really admirable, because as we know, all of these systems are so interconnected.
Right.
They really work with each other. Thank you. Okay. Tracy, do you want to chime in on this?
Sure. Actually, when the ARC started its work with the Criminal Justice Center, I was working for the ARC of Maryland at the time, and we had a man with Down syndrome who he died while in police custody, and it was a real misunderstanding. And so that's why the ARC of Maryland started getting involved. And then our self-advocacy group, People on the Go, also got very involved. So I worked with both of those things. And then because I am a mom of 4 children with they have I can't remember, they have challenges of their own, and so they my oldest son started having interactions with the police, and it was hard for me because sometimes when things happen, I laugh inappropriately. So the police thought that I thought it was a joke when he got in trouble. And so they were very upset with me. And I had to try to explain that laughing sometimes when it's inappropriate is just part of my disability.
So there was a lot in what you just shared there, Tracy. So I think I want to try to unpack it a little bit because I think there were some really, really strong takeaways. And first, you were mentioning a specific incident that happened back in 2015. There was a young man with Down syndrome, as you said. His name was Ethan Saylor. He was in a movie theater, and unfortunately, he was killed by law enforcement in that movie theater. And he had the police called on him, or it was actually security officers at the time, but they were actually also police officers. And he wanted to stay and watch the movie a second time. And so in the world of the theater, that would be considered stealing. So I think we're also hearing a theme, Noah, from what you shared earlier. Ethan was viewed as someone who was a thief and was not staying in the theater appropriately, and so security was called, and unfortunately he was killed. And you're right, Tracy, that was a real watershed moment in Maryland around law enforcement reform in particular, and including that lens of disability and everything that we do when we're looking at how we reform the criminal justice system. The other piece I wanted to pull out from what you were sharing is, you're a person with a disability yourself, but you're also a parent, a mother of children, and some of them have disabilities. And you've already noticed from your own work in advocacy, but also just as a parent, the interactions that your own kids are having with law enforcement. And hopefully they won't ever go further into the system. But it's just, I can imagine how frightening it must be to be both an advocate and understand sort of the reality of this situation and the danger that people with disabilities can be put in, and at the same time, having that experience as a parent.
It's scary sometimes because with my children's disability, you can't see them. So they look like they don't have any disability. And so sometimes it makes it hard for people to understand when they need support, because when they need support, it's not a time when they can ask for it because they're in crisis. And so it can be scary.
Yeah, for sure. And that brings up another point that, of course, disability isn't always visible. People don't always know that someone has a disability, and justice professionals might make some assumptions about people based on a variety of their identities, but also if they can't see a disability more openly. Thank you, Tracy. All right, Eddie, I want to make sure we give you a chance to chime in on this question. Why did you decide to advocate in the criminal justice space?
I was sitting down there I was sitting in Salem on a street corner, minding my own business in my own little world, and a girl reported me to the police that I was staring at her. And I was not staring at her. I was just in my own little world. And the police tried to come up to me and I was not in a talking mood. I ran from them in that. I went across the light. I went across and the light did not say walk. And so I got a ticket for that, and I was tased by the police officer and they put handcuffs on me and took me to their office in the bus mall, and we had to call my mom to come and get me, and it was very, very hard on me, and I could not ride the bus, the transit system for 60 days, and that I just had I had to walk everywhere where I needed to go until the 60 days was up. Then I could start riding the bus again. And
Eddie,
I
thank
wrote an
you.
apology to the police officer.
Eddie, thank you so much for sharing that. And we're all going to take a moment to pause and reflect on what you just shared with us. And I'm going to ask that the interpreters go ahead and also switch. Okay. So Eddie, I'm so sorry that that happened to you and that was your experience. And again, we're kind of seeing this theme here that someone called the police on you because they thought you were doing something wrong. And what you were really doing was being a person with a disability out in public, right? And just trying to mind your own business. And that escalated when law enforcement came to the scene. I can imagine that you were very, very frightened when that happened, especially when they chased you across the street and then the tasing. I really feel for you, and I'm so sorry that that happened.
And I think people with disabilities and that when they taste you, it hurts really bad, and that and you don't have time. It's really hard, and it's very scary to be arrested and that and being like being in their custody, and it's very hard. I could have went to jail, but they released me, and I went home and thought about it and that for a while, and I talked to my counselor and that, and we wrote an apology letter together. So that was the biggest thing I could do, apologize to the police officer.
So they said you needed to apologize to the law enforcement officers who had tased you.
Yes.
Wow. Well, thank you, Eddie, for telling us more about that experience. You know, I'm hearing a lot of, very deep and personal reasons why you do this work. And I just want to thank you all for being able to share those experiences with us and using it to fuel your own advocacy and making change in that space. And we do want to hear more about some of the changes that you're making in this space. So I'm going to turn it back to Reginald.
Alrighty. So Noah, can you tell us how what you're doing in your community in California that you're making a difference within the criminal justice system?
Well, right now at my day program, I currently go to a program that's called the Cadet Program with the ARC community, and we train police officers and do an internship with them and teach them how to work with disabled people.
Okay, and that is actually great and much needed work. We find that a lot of criminal justice professionals aren't really familiar with certain types of disabilities, especially with disabilities that aren't as visible as others are. So this is, pretty great that you are going out to different communities and training officers. What kind of stuff do you tell the officers, or what kind of advice would you give to police officers?
I would tell them to always evaluate and make sure the person is disabled first, because there are some people out there that will pretend to be disabled so they can get away with things. there are people out there that are disabled like me, but they don't seem to be disabled.
Mm-hmm.
So when you arrest them, you don't know if they're disabled or not.
Okay, so yeah, so you just want to make sure the officers know that they are interacting with a person with a disability and not just someone
Yes.
who's pretending.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Noah. Tracy, do you have anything to add?
Well, I helped train in one of our counties in Maryland. I helped train over 600 officers with another self-advocate. We did a 2-hour training for over a few months to the officers, and we were the only trainers, so we didn't have a person without a disability doing the training with us.
Sorry, I didn't hear that last part, Tracy. Could you say that again, please?
We did not have a person without a disability doing the training with us. We got support from the local the statewide self-advocacy group, and from another organization, but they were not present during our trainings. We did it by ourselves.
Okay, so, and do you think doing that was able to help the officers understand a bit more for seeing people with a disability provide the
Yeah.
training?
Yes, I think so. And we were able to share about some of our support needs, and we were able to give them helpful tips about how maybe to identify people with disabilities, because people might not know to share with the officer that they have a disability. So we gave them tips on how to maybe be able to help identify people with disabilities.
Do you mind sharing with us a couple of tips that you give?
Sure. We said that if an officer thought that maybe someone had a disability, and the person wasn't sharing with them about their disability, they could ask if they had an IEP in school and what supports maybe they got with their IEP, and people usually could tell them that, and that may give them some idea of what support they may need. The other thing what we thought was important was we told the officer to make sure they use plain language, and so that they didn't use too many words to confuse a person. And one of the other things was we suggested that they give people time to process the information that they were asking people, because sometimes when people are nervous, they might need extra time to think about what the officer had asked them.
Okay, so just going to unpack that a bit. So for one of the advice that you gave to the officers, for instead of just asking, do you have a disability, you ask them, you tell them to ask if the person has an IEP or need any supports to kind of help clue them in.
Yeah.
Okay, right, and also that you also want them to use more plain language and just kind of wait for a response instead of either using complicated words or speaking really fast to the person that they're interacting with.
Yes, because a lot of times people with IDD know a lot about their rights in their state because of maybe their provider. So they might get confused if the officer says, "Do you know your rights?" the person might think about the rights that they get with their services, but not really understand about the rights about being arrested.
Okay, I understand. And you just want to have the officers to be clear with what they're saying and not put anything, when I say anything to confuse a person who they're interacting with.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that information, Tracy. It was very helpful. All right, and Eddie?
Um, we don't have we do not train our police officers in Oregon. I would like to start something like that, and I would like to talk to Ariel about how to start training police officers in our area, like Beaverton, Hillsborough, Portland, and the all this. I would like to start doing that, training officers in all of Oregon's counties. I would like to take the lead on this and help lead to be able to talk to people with disabilities and get to know them, and because they think that they because we have problems too, and they don't know how to talk to us when we're having a mental health crisis or anything, and they talk to us and that, and I think it would be great to teach them how to talk to people when we're in crisis in that so we can learn all together how to work together in the state of Oregon on helping make the criminal justice system better, and how to work on how to work better together in that. I would like to take the lead and be the lead advocate on this, to train police officers that people with disabilities are equal people, and that we need help sometimes, and that we are here with them to help our community out and watch out in that, and to help our community out, because people pick on us and try to start fights with us, and that, and we need to learn, the police need to listen to people with disabilities in that. So I would like to train them how to respond to somebody that's having a crisis, like in that, so they can so so we can talk. I would like to have more guidance how to help train police officers to, when we have a mental health crisis in Oregon or something. I know counselors from mental health ride with the police officers now, but they need more training how to deal with the people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. And I want to work on that to try to help the police officers and the counselors to be able to work together.
Well, Eddie, you and I will love to work with you again. We do remember how great of a help you were for our Pathways to Justice event down in Oregon last year in July. And Aaron and I will explain what Pathways to Justice is later in this presentation. But Eddie, I would say that your admiration into wanting to do this for your home state is admirable, and if the opportunity presents itself, everyone and I will be happy to work with you to help train officers and lawyers and victim advocates and about people with disabilities and help them, serve you all more equally than. No, I would just say just help you more equally. Yeah.
And I would like to get the ARC of Oregon to help with this. So because we need people around the table that can help lead the fight. And I know that I have some good friends that could help. OSAC members would be willing to help in that. Our local self-advocacy coalition probably would step up and be willing to train police officers in their counties as well.
Okay, well, Ariel, it looks like we have a lot of work to do in Oregon. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eddie, thank you so much, as always, for volunteering to take the lead. That really brings up an important point that Tracy also raised earlier, that it's so important that self-advocates are out in front and they are calling for the change and they're calling for what they want to see happen, and that others can really be there to support and provide backup for that, but that the message is really coming from all of you. So thank you for that, Eddie. And I bet you Tracy also has some suggestions and tips for how the Oregon Self-Advocacy Coalition might also start doing some of this training work. But of course, we also want you to keep working with us here at the ARC-US and continue the work that you're doing in the state of Oregon. One other thing I wanted to mention that came up in that discussion was around disclosure of disability. And that came up in our last webinar, and I think it came up in our first webinar too. So I wanted to make sure that we kind of address that head on. That's one of the most common questions that we get from individuals, from self-advocates, from family members, from justice professionals. Like, why don't people just disclose? Why don't they just tell us that they have a disability? And our response is always that really that choice to disclose is very, very personal. And as we've heard on our call today with some of the stories that you've all shared, it's clear that sometimes when you do identify as a person with a disability, or someone thinks you have a disability, they might actually treat you worse, right? They might treat you more unfairly because of that. So I think it's a good reminder that disclosure is very, very personal choice. We want people to think about it that way. And we always encourage justice professionals to kind of approach everybody the same way, as if everyone they're working with has some kind of need, and their job is to figure out what that need is and address it. So they're approaching everyone the same way. Hopefully then they're not singling out or treating people with disabilities differently. So thank you both for sharing all of those really, really important points. So you guys have also mentioned a few kind of tips and suggestions, things that you've done in training. Reggie, you highlighted some of the ones that came out around using plain language or giving people time to process. And we focused a lot on law enforcement, but I also want to think about the kind of the bigger picture system that we're in. We've got courts and attorneys. We have victim advocates working in communities. And of course, we have law enforcement, but we also have prisons and jails. And, the people that work in these systems, we really call them criminal justice professionals. And so I'd like to hear kind of more tips from all of you about, like, what would we want them to change or do differently in their jobs to hopefully make a more equitable world. And I'll also invite, while our panelists are speaking, if you're a self-advocate in the audience and you want to chime in on what you'd like to see criminal justice professionals do differently, please feel free to put that in the chat box for others to see. So for this one, let me start with Tracy, and then we'll go to Noah, and then we'll come back to you, Eddie. So Tracy.
I think it's important that all like first responders and everyone who might encounter someone with a disability, that they build partnerships with like either the providers or the self-advocacy groups and get involved with each other, and maybe self-advocacy groups can invite people to their meetings, or go to, when we can all get back to going to places, if there's fairs and things like that, where people can meet and exchange information. So I think partnerships are really important.
Thank you, Tracy. We're going to take a quick pause to switch sign language interpreters. Perfect. Thanks, Jill. Yeah, so that was a really important point that you made, Tracy, about having really meaningful partnerships at the community level, and to make sure that justice professionals are working with self-advocacy groups, service providers, other members of the disability community, to be educated, but to also just work along side by side. That's really, really important. Okay, I think I said Noah next. So Noah?
I think it's important that we work together as a team instead of as separate, like, oh, that's the court, that's the police officer. And I think that everybody needs training. The judges need training, we need training, the police officers need training. I also think that people's providers, their parents, they should also help train the law enforcement, if you know what I mean. Because they're the ones whose children and whose family members and people they're providing for have disabilities.
Got it. So like making sure that sort of everyone has a stake in this is coming together, sitting around the same table and having these really, really important conversations.
Yes.
Thank you, Noah. And what about you, Eddie? What would you like to see criminal justice professionals?
I think everybody in Oregon needs to come around and talk together, and police officers need to meet people with developmental disabilities and get to know us and who we are and what we are for, to help them out and to communicate with them when we're having a problem or just want to talk to them or something. Because we are people here in the communities, and we have needs too, like other people do, like normal people and other professionals. We like to talk, and we like to interact with police officers. I like to talk to them. I like to ask them how they're doing and tell them to have a great day. I like police officers. They're not a bad thing. They're not bad people. They're really good people. But they have to have the right training to be successful in their job. And police officers are knowledgeable, and they can help us if we're in crisis or something. And if we're having a problem with somebody, they can talk to the other person and ask them to leave us alone.
Thank you for that, Eddie. So really kind of making kind of time and space for these communities to really get to know one another and have some conversations, and kind of almost like remembering at the end of the day, we're all human beings, we're all part of the community, but really taking time and space to get to know each other better.
Right.
All right, and I see some great things coming in through the chat box too. Let me scroll up a little bit so I don't miss too many here. No, I scrolled a little bit too far. So definitely lots of comments about more training, making sure people know what to expect when they're working with individuals with disabilities. Having kind of sounds like especially law enforcement think more about kind of investigation rather than getting defensive or potentially hurting somebody. having them slow down, make sure that people have time to process information. Great. These are all really incredible responses. Thank you so much. And please feel free to keep sharing these in the chat box. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Reginald.
All right, I think right now we have another polling question. So this is for our audience. Can you put in our polling box, have you done work in criminal justice, have you done work in criminal justice advocacy? Okay, and as a reminder, if you're on mobile, if you can't enter into the poll, then you can also use our chat box. Okay, so here are the results. We have about 39% saying yes, 45% said no, and 16% saying that they plan to work in criminal justice advocacy. All right. These are really good results, and I see some are coming up on the chat box too. All right. Just want to check and see, are we good for time? Should we skip ahead to one question just to save time for the Q&A? So there is one last question I want to ask our panel before we move on to our participant Q&A. So we're not doing our participant Q&A right now, but in preparation, please input all of the questions that you have that you would like to ask our panelists in our Q&A box. So if you have any kind of questions that you would like our panelists to answer, please put them into the Q&A box. It should be located at the bottom of your screen. Okay. Ariel, there is this one question I want to ask before we move on to the Q&A portion. Could you go over to the next slide?
Is it this one?
No.
That's a good one.
No.
Do you want to maybe ask this one first, though? I think this is a really good one.
Like this one or the one before that?
This one.
Okay, cool.
The advice.
Okay. Oh, this is the one I wanted to ask. Yes, awesome. So, alrighty. So I'm gonna ask this question starting with you, Noah. What advice would you give to a person who would want to be a self-advocate?
Learn how they work and learn to build confidence in yourself so you can stand up for other people and yourself.
Yeah, so having self-confidence and also learning the work of what an advocate does.
Yes.
Okay. Was there anyone that you learned from, or is it something that you kind of created yourself?
I learned from a lot of people I've worked through from going to the ARC.
Mm-hmm.
That's really when I became a self-advocate mainly. I had a lot of meetings with other people and other groups.
Okay, okay, great. So you learned from the ARC and then you just grew from that.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. And which ARC chapter did you work with?
East County.
The ARC of East County?
Yes.
Okay, great. So anyone who is in California and is in that area, join, see if you can work with that chapter. Thank you, Noah. Tracy, do you have any words of wisdom?
I think I would just encourage them to find out if they have either a state self-advocacy group and or a local self-advocacy group in their area, and find out how when they might meet, or like now our statewide self-advocacy group in Maryland is coming together on weekly uh, calls and talking about the pandemic. And so they there might be something like that in your area to get involved in.
Okay, so have them become aware of the advocacy groups that are in their state. Do you have any kind of groups in mind that you've worked with in the past or that you would like to recommend?
Well, I worked with self-advocates becoming empowered. That's the kind of national group. And then I worked with my local self-advocacy group in my county in Maryland, Montgomery County, Stand Together, and then the statewide is People on the Go of Maryland. So there's lots of different opportunities in Maryland, and I'm sure if you are trying to find it, sometimes the arts are a good place to, in your state, if you have an art, to help you find your self-advocacy groups.
Okay, so those were really, really good, ideas and responses for all of our attendees to reach out to. Would you also recommend them just to do like a Google search, or how would they find these different organizations?
You can do a Google search, and self-advocates becoming empowered does come up, which is the national group, and then maybe even your state group has a website that may come up, so you can try there. Sometimes your if you DD councils have information sometimes as well, or the universities for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Most states have one of those too. So you can, those are all resources that could help you find your self-advocacy groups in your area.
Thank you, Tracy. And I know that our attendees will really appreciate that information on how to find any advocacy groups that are in their areas. Okay. And Eddie, did you have what kind of advice would you give to a person who would like to be a self-advocate?
So on developmental disabilities would have it, and the ARC would know about how to get a hold of OSAC, the ARC of Oregon, and the other ARCs would know how to get a hold of the OSAC too, because there's local self-advocacy groups in all our counties, and they're run by different individuals that is part of OSAC in that. And we have different groups that are a part of OSAC, and we have a strong group. We have strong groups in Oregon, and if you guys can look online, we have websites for our groups, and if you need to join a group in Oregon, there are groups in different counties, self-advocacy groups, and different agencies have groups for people with developmental disabilities to join in Oregon.
Okay, I see
So
that.
And I would just say keep on advocating for yourself, and I would have the people, I would have advocates that don't know how to advocate for themselves, is to speak up for yourself and talk to somebody and advocate for yourself, because you know what you want and you know where you want to live. If you want to live independently or in an adult foster home or on your own, go for it. Talk to your county worker, talk to your caseworkers, talk to people that support you. I would encourage people to advocate for themselves, because advocating for yourselves will make you stronger and it will help you grow into a good self-advocate. So I encourage people to grow in that and become a self-advocate. And you can be strong and go to trainings in that and conferences and learn how to be a self-advocate. And that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you for that encouragement, Eddie. Yes, so I think we're going to move on to our Q&A portion, because I see that a lot of our attendees have some really great questions to ask. All right, and for those who haven't, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box so we can read them out loud and ask our panelists. Okay. Ariel, would you like to start off by asking the first question?
I can. I'm guessing it might be time to switch interpreters though, so I'm going to go ahead and pause so we can do that before we start jumping into the Q&A. And please go ahead and keep typing those questions into the Q&A box. All right, Paula, are you ready? Perfect, I see the spotlight. Okay, so let me take a look here. Oh, sorry, that one was a comment, so I'm just gonna move a little bit here. You know, one question I have for all of you is, how should people without disabilities kind of be involved in this work? You've mentioned some maybe helping support self-advocates who want to do training and other things, but how should people without disabilities be involved in this work?
I think people without disabilities should be involved, and you can support a local self-advocacy group or your local or you can support your local self-advocacy group or become a care provider so you can go and be a caregiver to somebody with a developmental or intellectual disability. Be a caregiver. Sign up to be a caregiver in that. And it would be very positive if you started advocating and helping out.
Thanks, Eddie. Noah or Tracy, other ideas? Maybe we'll start with Tracy.
I think that you should find an area of interest that is interesting to you, like if it's whatever kind of rights work you like, and then find out if there's an advocacy group in your area and maybe see if it can partner.
You could work for an art.
Oh, sorry, hold on one second. Go ahead, Tracy, and then I think that was Noah. We'll come back to you.
You could partner with the local self-advocacy group, or but it doesn't always have to be just disability specific things you work on together, because people with disabilities are in the community more than ever, and we have interest in other things too.
And Noah, do you want to chime in on this? Oh, you're muted, Noah.
So you can work for an ARC, or you could even teach skills to disabilities. You don't have to necessarily be part of a self-advocacy group. You could teach skills like independent living or cooking. You could teach skills how to live on your own, or even how to do what you want to do. That's what I think is possible.
Right. So some really wonderful ideas around partnerships and providing support, and definitely appreciate the shout out to go work for an ARC. Certainly we'd love to have people come and join us here at the ARC. We work at our national office, but we also have more than 600 state and local chapters around the country. Okay, we've gotten a couple of questions around what I would call sort of like outward IDing of a disability. So things like having an ID card or wearing a bracelet or some kind of medical tag that basically explains that you have a disability and or kind of tells people if you take any medications. So people would like to hear more about this from everybody. And I'll go ahead and kick things off and just say, from the ARC US perspective, this is a very, very personal choice. So if you are a person with a disability and you'd like to identify and use a card or a bracelet or something else that has some of your information on it, that is definitely your choice. We have heard, unfortunately, some stories around self-advocates who did use things like an ID card or a bracelet and found that it wasn't very helpful. Or that they actually felt like maybe they were in more danger because they had disclosed that they had a disability. And I know one of the things that law enforcement will say to folks is that, you have to be very, very careful reaching for something in a pocket or in a bag or a purse, because to law enforcement, that could look like you might be reaching for some kind of weapon. So we usually try to say kind of all of that and really leave it up to individual choice. But Noah, Eddie, Tracy, thoughts around ID cards or kind of other ways that people with disabilities might identify themselves? And Noah, we'll start with you this time.
You could use a bracelet. I like the idea of a bracelet. I don't think the idea of an ID is a good one, like you said, because it could look like you're reaching for a knife. But if they ask you to take out your identification and it's on your identification that you have disability, that'd be a good idea.
Thanks, Noah. Eddie, what do you think?
I think the state DMVs should have a question: if you have a developmental disability, please check this box. So it's on your driver's license, or when the police pull you over or stop you, if you have an identification card or a driver's license, then they would know that you have a developmental disability. I think it would be great in all 50 states to have a checkbox if you're going for your ID or your driver's license. I never thought of that, but I just thought of it now.
Thanks, Eddie. And Tracy, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I know our statewide self-advocacy group has put in testimony. Our state was gonna do something like this where you could check a box. It's up to you whether you want to or not, and give some information about your disability. But it is a personal choice. I don't know. I don't think I like the idea very much. I know I worked with trainers with disabilities who have had things like shoe tag. Um, he was a person with autism, and on good days he can give you his address, but sometimes he can't, depending on the day. So I think it's a personal choice, but I do think that people should be educated on what's out there so they can make a decision for themselves what they feel comfortable doing.
Right. Thank you all for that. We've got time for one more question, I think, for all of you before we kind of wrap things up here. And the question is, why do you think it's important that self-advocates become involved with criminal justice advocacy? So not just becoming, self-advocates that maybe work in the disability space, but why criminal justice? Why should they choose to advocate in that space?
I start out with that.
I was just going to call on
Ariel.
you, Eddie. You read my mind.
I think that people with disabilities should get involved with our criminal justice system so they can train officers around their state where they live and get to know them one-on-one. Because police officers are good people too, and you might bond a friendship with a police officer in that. And it would be great to bond with a police officer to get to know them and know what they're for and know that they're in the community to be law enforcement law enforcement in that. There are good ones out there that can help you. And it's great to talk to officers. And I have friends that are police officers. My sister was a Douglas County sheriff in Douglas County in Reedport, Oregon, and I got to go spend some time with her and ride along and see one of my friends as a state trooper, and his name is Josh Young, and he's a great guy, and that I known him in school, and he went to Hauser Community Church. His dad was a North Bend police officer. I know him as well, Buddy Young. So they're all my friends around Coos County in North Bend and Reedsport. They're all my friends.
Thank you, Eddie. So it sounds like, one of the reasons to get involved is you can help with things like law enforcement training, making sure they know how to better understand and work with individuals with disabilities. Noah, what do you think? Why should self-advocates get involved in the criminal justice space?
Because it helps expand your rights, in my opinion. You can go very far as a self-advocate, but until you get police officers involved and judges involved, you're not going to get quite as far as you could.
Got it. So the justice system is probably one of those areas where your rights might be threatened the most. So it's really, really important that we advocate in this space.
Yeah.
Thanks, Noah. And Tracy, I'll give you the closing word on that.
I just think it's really important because people with disabilities are out in the community more than ever and living the kind of lives they want to live, which means their possibility of having to interact with either law enforcement or some type of first responder is more likely that they may have that kind of interaction. So I think it's important for people with disabilities to be involved so they know what they can do to help themselves and others.
Right. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, all of you, for sharing that wisdom, that advice, that guidance for other self-advocates and for people without disabilities too, about how to get involved, but also why it's so important. Now, we did not get to your question today. Please feel free to email us at nccjdinfo@thearc.org. Also, several of you have shared some personal experiences that you've had in the chat box or in the Q&A, and you can also share those with us at nccjdinfo@thearc.org. We'd be happy to direct you to some resources, especially local resources that might be able to help you in your specific case. So nccjdinfo@thearc.org. Thank you again to our presenters for those questions. I'm going to turn things back over to Reginald to get us closed out.
Thank you, Ariel. Just want to say thank you, Noah, thank you, Eddie, and thank you, Tracy, for taking time out of your schedules to do this webinar with us. I think I can speak for our attendees that this has been a lovely experience. Uh-oh. This has been a lovely experience, and we really appreciate having you all with us. As you can see on your screen that we have listed a few national self-advocacy groups that you can take note of and just help you find some advocacy groups that can kind of help you on your road to becoming a self-advocate if you so choose. We have the Arts National Council of Self-Advocates, the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, Self-Advocacy Resource and Technical Assistance Center, Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered. I remember Tracy mentioning this organization earlier. We have Green Mountain Self-Advocates and TASH. And we also have links to some resources that some of these organizations have published and has sent out. So once our PowerPoint becomes available, please feel free to check out these resources. And if you would like to get in contact with any of our presenters today, we have Noah, Eddie's, and Tracy's contact information right here. Please feel free to email them or call in some cases. And I can ensure that our presenters will be more than happy to answer your questions. And this is from the NCCJD team. If you have any questions for either myself or for Ariel, please feel free to email me at thomas@thearc.org or ariel@sims@thearc.org. And last but not least, I just want to thank everyone for attending us through this series. This has been a wonderful experience for us, and I hope that you all have taken away some valuable information from all three of our webinars. And I thank you so much for joining us. And if you would like, you can tell us, please take a few moments to tell us what you thought about this event.
After the webinar has closed, a survey will appear on your screen automatically. Please do take a few moments to fill that out. Tell us what you thought. Tell us how things went with our access services today, captioning and American Sign Language, and any other thoughts that you want to share with us. And I do want to extend our thanks to Paula and Jill for the sign language interpretation today. And thank you to our captioner, Tony. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to all of you who are taking time out of your day to be with us and listen in. And of course, one more big thank you to our presenters. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.